Right. Good evening. It's a few minutes after 7 o'clock on December 4th. I'll open up the Hamilton Planning Board meeting. I'm Brian Stein, the chair. On our docket tonight, we have a public hearing for a special permit petition by Mobility for a small cell site along Bay Road. We'll be doing master planning update regarding our housing portion of the master plan. We'll be talking about potential zoning bylaw changes and amendments, and do meeting minutes and updates. So, Eric, you can start, please.
Let me.
Sure. A little preface.
We need to have the Mr. Clerk read the hearing notice.
Sorry about that.
And this is the language.
That's it.
Okay. In accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 11, and the Hamilton Zoning Bylaw, Section 7.2, Communication Towers and Telecommunication Antenna Facilities, the Planning Board of the Town of Hamilton will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, December 4th, 2018 at 7 p.m. at Hamilton Town Hall, Memorial Room, 577 Bay Road, Hamilton, Mass. The proposed is to erect a micro system receiver transmitter upon and atop a new pole height 36 feet 8 inch above grade, in order to support local wireless service. The subject property is located within the Business District B zoning district and is located within the Massachusetts Department of Transportation right-of-way for State Route 1A and is abutting property at 161 Bay Road near the intersection of Walnut and Bay Road. The pre-application presentation for said petition was made on August 21st, 2018 before the Hamilton Planning Board.
Thanks, Rick. Okay. Now we're good to go.
Good evening, Mr. Chairperson and Town of Hamilton Planning Board. My name is Eric Callio. I am a permitting manager with Mobility, and I work out of Swansea, New Hampshire, which is next to Keene, New Hampshire, if you're familiar with that geographical area. This evening, I am here before you to discuss the special permit application that has been filed with regards to a small cell pole installation at the intersection of Bay Road and Walnut Road in South Hamilton, Massachusetts. The purpose of the equipment, to give you a little background as to why Mobility is looking to install this. We are a wireless infrastructure company that works with the major wireless carriers all across the country to develop wireless solutions for customers, everything from towers to small cell to distributed antenna systems, also known as DAS. The particular project that we're working on up here in New England is with regards to small cell. And the small cell is to assist the wireless customers with regards to their data capacity needs. And that pertains to their apps, such as, you know, when they use YouTube, or if they use Facebook, anything that involves data that is going to give them a better capacity, a much better experience, so they don't get that hang time on their application. The location that Mobility has identified in the town of Hamilton is, again, at the intersection of Bay Road and Walnut Road. And what we're proposing to install is a 40-foot wood pole. And the new pole would contain a small cell antenna on the top, along with a equipment that supports the small cell with regards to the AC distribution box, GPS apparatus, and a power disconnect on the side. This is all for the utility purposes of powering the site. The location itself is on the Mass DOT right-of-way, and our engineers felt that this location would help the wireless customers, because we're representing Sprint in this market. It would help those Sprint customers with their data capacity needs. The proposed new pole location is not very far from where we're standing right now, and so we would definitely cover a lot of the residential and commercial customers within the community. The purpose of the Small cell as well. We take effort to make sure that we respect the aesthetics. We're doing a wood pole so that it blends in with the other wood poles in the area. The reason why we're going with a new pole is there are not comparable existing poles next to this new pole that could house the small cell equipment due to the fact that these are primary poles. They have the transformers on the top, so it would be very difficult to get that desired coverage by going to a different pole. The project that we're doing, we're certainly looking to get this rolled out in Hamilton so the customers that have wireless can have better data capacity needs. And I know my colleague had provided construction drawings along with a proposed photo simulation of the equipment. And if you are able to review that, the proposed new pole is basically so that when you look at the pole, it's like a standard wood pole that you'd see on the street, but most of the equipment is very small in nature, so it's not by any means unsightly or huge. We make efforts to blend it in. We're working with Mass DOT in terms of the application and making sure they're on board with it. We've had a preliminary meeting with them, and they are on board with this. And certainly I come before your board this evening to talk about this proposed small cell site, and if the board has any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Questions from the board?
Where could we see such an installation? Are there any others in Massachusetts, or?
There are. As a matter of fact, there are. I just recently worked with the city of Lawrence, Massachusetts on 10 sites that have, small cell installations. So we have them spread out throughout the city. I know we've worked with other communities not that far from here, like Chelsea, Lynn, Saugus, Danvers, Revere, just to name a few that are nearby. But we do have attachments on existing and new pole structures as well.
Are you just foreseeing this one in the area, or I know these things kind of happen more frequently, obviously, than a major cell tower does. Are you seeing more than just this in the community?
Mr. Chairperson, so this is the first one that we're looking to roll out, and then once we build it, we'll definitely need to assess our network again, and certainly this is the area we want to cover. Could there be more? Certainly. When that's going to happen, I don't have a timeline on that, but certainly we want to start with this one.
Just a competition and a sort of overlap. We have a proposed cell tower to be located behind this building and potential site behind the public safety building, which was probably about 100 yards from this.
Okay.
So those would be full service, probably, what are those, 104 feet?
Would Sprint be on that tower?
About 104 feet. When and if they're built, how would that impact your Mobilite site?
It would certainly, it wouldn't hurt it in any way. And as a matter of fact, for the tower perspective, that'll further assist should Sprint be on that site, that would further assist the customers, not, with their voice and their data capacity. But the small cell is designed to be in that right of way to really give those customers a very beneficial experience. Whereas, with a tower, they're still getting that experience, but not as fast as you would with a small cell.
And remind me what the range is, coverage for this site?
The small cell itself, we can cover anywhere from a quarter to a half mile, and certainly we, in rural areas, we've seen on the higher end. So in this area, I think we could certainly, cover that.
Yeah, my only concern is that the cell coverage down there will be so good that they will have people congregating.
Well, but it's only for data. That's kind of the odd thing is that.
There we go.
There was a, and I believe my colleague had submitted this with the package. So we had provided via our mobility RF engineer the coverage maps, which show, yes, that's correct. So those are the color coverage maps. There's 3 sheets to them, and basically, I can just briefly walk through these. So the area of interest sheet would show a triangle, which is where we're proposing the pole.
Yeah.
The network deficiency on the next page has a color table with regards to, you know, where there are areas that the network coverage is critical, which is the pink. Forgive my color blindness, but yellow would be the above average, and then green would be average. So when we get this small cell built, if you go to the 3rd page, which is the proposed solution, the blue would be the infill coverage for that small cell. So if you compare that page to the network deficiency page, you can see a lot of that red has been taken up by the blue, which of course would be where the small cell would help fulfill that capacity need.
Again, this is only data, right? It's not.
That's correct. This is data.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the issue down there
good
is
point.
you can't make a call at the shopping center, you know, right now. So.
And I would think that if, you know, and if there's a proposed tower that's going behind here, that would certainly, you know, help with the voice part of it.
Yeah, sure, Bill.
Bill Olson, 419 Highland Street. How you guys doing tonight? Couple questions, although I applaud the technology, and obviously we have a gap of coverage in that area, I just have some concerns. But the pole is 40 feet. What is the height of the adjacent power poles that are across the street?
I believe those to be of a comparable height, which are anywhere from 35 to 40 feet. That's usually
Yeah, how do you come to 40 feet? Is that the max you're allowed, or is that what the ideal is, or is that what the similar poles are? How do you come to the 40 feet? Could it be 30 feet? Could it be 25? Or?
Well, I mean, if you're talking 25 feet or 30 feet, that means that, you know, now you're, I mean, not only are you not staying within, you know, the other heights of the poles, but also, you know, now you're degrading the small cell coverage. So we're going with the 40 feet so we can really give our customers the best possible experience in terms of, you know, the small cell technology.
And then that location, it's have you talked to, does the property owner aware of this, or does the property owner need to be involved with that, or?
So the property owner, as far as I know,
Actually-
has been made aware of it. As a matter of fact,
Just because this is being broadcast on
Oh,
TV
sorry,
and
yeah.
recorded, can you
Yeah,
just
keep
talk
it-
into the microphone?
I can repeat those.
Good point, yes.
Yeah, I guess that last one's fine.
The question with regards to the property owner, so a couple things with that, and I did talk to my colleague. They have been made aware of it. I don't believe they're here this evening. I also, you know, understand that there would have been not only a public notice, but a abutters notice that went out. But, you know, certainly, you know, we've been, you know, transparent with this application and would,
I've seen a lot of people here.
you know, they can reach out if they have any questions.
Do you know whether it was sent out, the notice to abutters?
I would have to defer.
It
to-
was.
Okay.
It
Yes,
was.
sir. Yes, sir.
So that's pretty amazing to me that we don't see anyone here. Talking to ourselves doesn't do
Yeah.
much good.
Yeah.
Don't get
that-
into an argument with
that
yourself,
happens.
Peter.
And are there room for other carriers on the pole?
That is a possibility, yes. At this time, with the network, I don't see that coming in the near future, but certainly that would be a possibility down the road that you know could be designed.
And are you up for it being put somewhere else? I mean, I'm not a big fan of it being on. We're trying to get rid of poles in this town, and to add poles is not We spent a lot of time trying to put this cell phone tower off, out of the view of people coming down nice historic Hamilton. So are you up to flexibility to relocate this pole somewhere else in town?
In looking at this location, this would be the most comparable and beneficial location. As a matter of fact, we, took some time to study this area, and we felt that, and again, based on, the respect for the historical, aspect of the community, this would be the least evasive approach. Certainly I know there's concern about additional new poles, but based on the fact that the existing poles are not able to accommodate the small cell equipment due to this being primary poles, this would be, the next best option to get the small cell coverage that the town of Hamilton customers would be desiring.
Bill,
Yeah,
Bill brought up a good
yeah.
point, because one of the boards that Rick and I are on, that's involved with downtown, we had, thrown out the idea, it's very early on, about burying the power lines in and around downtown, in the business district, just again to have a better looking downtown and more inviting downtown. And not that that's going to happen anytime in the near future, but it's possible. So that is a concern of mine as well, that then we'd have this one pole, potentially kind of in the middle of nothing, just standing there, and maybe more at some point. So what are the alternatives, I guess, for locating something like this?
So in situations in which, a new pole is not possible, we would certainly entertain attaching to an existing pole. The issue with that, as I had previously stated, is that the area poles are what they call primary poles per the utility, which would be National Grid. Those poles have the high tension lines on the top, as well as, in some cases, those round transformers. So what happens in that scenario is the utilities will say that, we can't go on those poles just because, from an engineering standpoint, that's not going to work. Again, and certainly, to reaffirm the photo simulation, we're looking to, make this as, blend in with the existing, infrastructure as best as possible. We're using a wood pole. Could we, paint everything brown? We could. Could we, it's certainly something that, we could, work with the community on, and, we have some options with that, but, certainly based on this neighborhood, there's just really no other way around that small cell coverage other than that location.
Patrick, was the public safety building thought about at all? That's fairly close by, and we talked about a tower behind there at some point, but I know that's less feasible.
The discussion on locating a tower there with Varsity was, they were looking at removing the existing tower preferably and placing a new tower there. The one that's existing is about 60 feet, and they would be looking at doing one extensively more than that.
Right.
What would have to happen is that they would have to put all of the equipment inside of the public safety building on the second floor of it. So that would require probably an amendment of the lease, because that's consuming space out of the public safety building that's currently used by the police department, sparingly used right now. So they said that they could provide that level of space, but that is a potential at some point.
Who do you speak of when you say they said?
Varsity,
Varsity said it, not the police force.
right.
Patrick, did you say 6 feet or 60 feet?
The existing tower's around 60 feet.
60.
Yes, sir.
And that's the communication for the police,
Yeah.
Right,
which we see
Right.
up on Gordon Conwell
right.
building.
So I guess my question is, is it possible to locate it over there? Which is, I mean, literally it's right down, it's like a few doors down from here.
It would be something that I would need to bring to the engineers. Again, I'm, happy to reach out to them and say, could we go in that location? If that's something that we can do, then, I could certainly make that,
Obviously,
known to
it's
the board.
Working with the town and so forth on that, and I'm assuming this is similar to, other cell types of facilities that, are located in churches and so forth, right? And you pay a fee to locate on their building or in their building or something like that. I'm assuming it's the same thing, right?
Right, the carriers will have a lease agreement with the private landlord, and, there's usually a rent payment.
That's my question. Like, how does this work? Just because it's on the right of way, is there, what's your, I was a little late, but the approval process, what's the goal of the approval process? Walk me through what that timeline is and what.
What do you mean in
Like,
terms of?
is this by right, or is this?
No, it's,
You have to-
our bylaw requires all wireless cellular communication equipment to have a special permit,
Okay.
as it's written in the bylaw. Of course, that bylaw
Last generation.
expects that we're talking primarily towers. It doesn't talk about this type of technology.
Is it allowed to be in the right of way by our bylaw?
Well, it's,
That's not so much
One
up
of
to
the-
us.
One of the important
are you a selectman?
conversations.
I am, yes.
Okay, that's what I thought, so I think we need to have a discussion about that if you're.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Because
I
I
just
mean-
came to gather information. I'm talking tonight I'm not talking as a selectman, but I'm talking as a citizen, just gathering
Citizen,
information.
sure.
When the pre-application came to the town back in the summer, I did some check-in with town council. She advised us that what we would do in the instance of this technology being different than what our bylaw illustrates is we simply use the bylaw and we create a listing of the elements in the bylaw that fit and those that don't. And I've actually done that for the benefit of the board and sent that out to them yesterday so they could read through. We may have to cuss and discuss through the individual opinions that I've had relative to each of the items. The board may disagree with me on some, and they may entirely agree on others, but we need to work through that. Again, this is a technology that doesn't fit our existing bylaw, but as I suspect the board members noticed, and I know Janelle mentioned to me, the vast majority of the elements in the bylaw do fit.
question, you have an agreement with Mass DOT or a license to site these on DOT property, right?
That is correct, Mr. Mitchell.
So I'm assuming that's going to be your preference since you've already negotiated an agreement with Mass DOT as opposed to trying to negotiate an agreement with the town. Does that have any impact on your decision-making?
Well, I mean, certainly we've come this far with Mass DOT, which, certainly, we would want to continue on that track. That being said, also we're going to need to, get planning board approval. So, with that, we got to, certainly work with the town, but I'm hoping that, we can, come to an agreement with, location and, whether it's Mass DOT or the town.
Does the Federal Telecommunications Act come into play on this particular technology?
Yes, it does. As a matter of fact, the FCC just recently amended their information with regards to small cell, and in essence, the small cell applications are protected under the federal law, in which jurisdictions are required to, not only work with the carriers, but work with them in a, reasonable fashion and in an expedited fashion with regards to, number of days, in sighting and aesthetics and so forth. So I think that's partially why, from what I saw in your agenda, you're going to have a discussion about microcell or something or small cell. But I know a lot of communities are starting to, get their arms around that, if you will. And I think that's good in some sense because, maybe that helps clean up the process. So instead of having a wireless tower process that, one size fits all with small cell, if you have something that's for small cell, it's a little bit more appropriate.
Clara?
What is that time frame?
So for new sites, it is what they call a shot clock. It is 90 days. And basically, that is, from the time that the application is filed. And then if there are, any, changes, as a result of that, then, what that usually does is, that resets the, that stops the timer and that, resets the clock. But that is the, federal guideline.
And with cell towers, and the question is going to be the same with the small site technology. The Telecommunications Act says if a area is found deficient in coverage, essentially the carrier or the cell tower developer has the right to override local zoning and cite it. Is that true for small site or small technology?
I'm not thinking that language is entirely correct. I think that might be more along the lines of if a jurisdiction does not act in in so many days, then the application can be deemed approved. Yeah. But I think that's where, there might be some confusion on that. Again, it's not that, a carrier can go to a board and then even if the board says no, you get approved. I think it's just, more so that, boards act in a timely fashion.
So who determines timely?
So the FCC has, mandated that, there was a shot clock with regards to applications. So for example, this application would be under the 90-day time frame for small cell. Right. Attachment sites would be 45 days or 60 days. So those are, again, what a lot of that FCC language had set out to clarify.
And does that require a decision in 90 days?
It requires a decision, yes, in terms of the board to, take an action, whether, they, approve it or, if there's a continuance, then certainly there would be, some reason that they'd continue it. But the big thing with that bylaw too is, and this is what, the FCC has also said that, not only do the carriers in jurisdictions need to work together, but, it's also to prevent, communities from, arbitrarily denying applications. But, instead if a carrier comes in and they've done their best to address the requirements of the bylaw, that, the expectation from the FCC is that the jurisdictions will work with the carriers and vice versa.
Do you anticipate co-location on the tower by other companies? I think you had mentioned that Sprint is the carrier that will be on there initially, right?
For the proposed new pole small cell, yes. Yeah. Other carriers, that is a possibility, but at this time, there are no other carriers vying. To be honest with you, I would say at the most maybe one additional. But in my experience in this project, I have yet to see that anywhere.
Who are the competitors that you have in this technology?
So right now, and I'm speaking from knowledge of the New England market, so there's us, Mobility, and then, there's Crown Castle, Extenet, there's also Light Tower, American Tower. And our company, as along with a lot of these other companies, work heavily, throughout Massachusetts and in New England. And, we've certainly been able to, install a lot of this technology in those communities. And, and certainly, their boards have had, similar questions, but, ultimately we were able to come up with a product that, met the needs of the community.
Are these electrically powered?
That is correct.
Okay. Just so you know, we have a lot of power outages here.
Yes, and we've actually designed that so if that happens, we have battery backup, so that way there the site can continue to run for a period of time till the commercial power is restored.
Okay. Who's the power fed? Is it fed on the pole, from pole to pole, or underground?
Actually, this should be known on the drawings, but they're going to be doing that by means of an overhead line.
According to the drawings across the road.
Yeah, some more lines across the road. Yes. I got two more questions, and I'll just ask them so I can sit down. You can just answer, but I'll just run through them. One was just sort of looking forward. Once again, welcome the technology, welcome a solution because we need one. But I just want to make sure we're sort of dotting the i's, crossing the t's, moving forward. But one is it 4G, 5G. What's the sort of the breadth of this technology?
This is definitely within 4G, and
Okay.
we're getting ready for 5G because that is going to be the next.
But this will be compatible with a 5G.
Yes.
Okay. Next is a master plan. I guess I would ask as part of the special permit, we see a master plan because we don't want to just approve one and then another one. Like we don't want to do a slow bet. Like let's see what they're all going to be. So I assume they should do some sort of worst case scenario master plan of what all the poles would be along this corridor.
Are you seeing? Is this? You mentioned the other communities that you're in. I'm assuming you're mainly putting these in downtowns and business districts and so forth. You're not necessarily thinking of putting them out in the middle of Hamilton where there's a few houses.
Well, actually, Mr. Chairperson, we are going in residential communities as well. So, you are correct. We're certainly within the commercial areas, but there is also a big need in residential areas because, there are apartment buildings or senior housing or condominium complexes. So it is out there in rural areas.
And are these only data? I know this one's only data, but are most of them only data, or is it voice as well?
No, they should be only data. That's really the purpose of the small cell technology, to help with that data capacity.
That was my last question, was on the data. So Telecommunications Act didn't really deal with data. It dealt with pretty so long ago. So we're sure it's covered, the telecommunications covers data? That's what I was confused by. So once again, I haven't done any research on it. I'm just asking the questions, but has that been tested and we'll let you talk to that. But
Sure. Oh, absolutely. It has. And as a matter of fact, the FCC has, and again, going back to the most recent ruling, starting with the Telecommunications Act, and certainly with the most recent FCC ruling that this does cover small cell technology. It's something that the FCC has identified that is necessary. It's a technology in which the carriers are we're licensed with the FCC to do this work. And the encouragement from the FCC to the jurisdictional communities is to work with the carriers on these build-outs.
Will this have the ability to allow people who want to telecommunicate and work at home instead of having to drive to Boston, Burlington, et cetera, et cetera?
Absolutely, Mr. Ruffett. As a matter of fact, I would say that people that are within these small cell, and again, they may have good coverage with their emails on their work laptops, whatever. But if there's apps they need to get on, that'll help them. I work remotely myself, so I'm I can appreciate the benefit of small cell.
Technology where you're living?
Yes, I do. The community I live in, we're certainly using it, and it's been very beneficial. And people actually have embraced it, and I think a lot of that too is the fact that, and I think it's the generation of people coming up now, especially with the iPhones and the Androids and the laptops, is you know, there's a lot of applications that people need to use in order to live life, like, you know, open your garage door, or get Pandora music, or, you know, order your groceries, or, you know, call in your prescriptions. I mean, you name it, you know, I could go on and on, but that, you know, the gist of that is it's the benefit of the handheld device is to make people's lives easier, to, you know, help with their safety and well-being, and to communicate.
To Selectman Olson's request or comment a while ago, would Mobility be willing to prepare a master plan for the community locating small cell service in the community in a way that gives us better service than we now have?
That is certainly a condition, Mr. Refit, that, you know, we would certainly work with the community on.
Thank you.
Related to that, Patrick, we see a fairly limited extension of the strong signal, and so would you go along the DOT and use the MBTA line and just go every, you know, 1,000 feet and put another tower up?
The thing with the MBTA is, and that, you know, certainly sounds like a good suggestion, but we're not, most of the carriers are not really doing a lot of work with them right now, because they have, you know, different kind of, you know, a perspective on it. I'm not, you know, saying they'd be against it, but you know, small cell hasn't really, you know, taken off with the MBTA. You know, at this time, at least not with our company, and I don't think the other ones are doing much with them.
The MBTA tried something like this for wireless, I believe,
Yeah.
along the
Yes.
tracks, right, up in this
for
area.
voice as well.
Right.
It's not restricted to just data.
I know for a fact, you know, riding the MBTA, not necessarily this line, but, you know, I use the Fitchburg line to go into, you know, the city from time to time, and, you know, you'll see, like, you know, cell towers as you're going by the community, but, you know, I know that they have not done much with small cell, because I dropped coverage.
Community opposition was so significant, they stopped that contractor dead in its tracks. So my concern is this, and it's not related specifically to this application, but since it seems to be carrier specific, we could be facing AT&T, Verizon, and who, you know, T-Mobile.
Yeah, you say you have 4 major carriers, right?
Wanting to put poles in various sites, I mean, literally downtown. So you'd have 4 or 5 of these type poles. So I'm just thinking, we've got a real challenge here, and it's not really about this applications per se. It's really about, do we have the ability to control multiple applications? You know, it's sort of the conflict between the FCC requirement that we fairly treat, and if they meet the requirements of the bylaw, we have to approve it. But that could be said for other carriers as well. So I'm going like, well, how do we prevent the proliferation of multiple poles in various parts of town? And I don't have the answer to that, and you probably don't as well, but it's certainly a concern.
That's my question, as to whether there's to explore the site behind the public safety building, because if there is a site there that would accommodate more over time without the disruption along the street, that maybe that would be a better option.
Yeah.
A question, have you done any co-location?
Not on this project. I've worked in the wireless industry for a number of years, so from like a tower site perspective, or an existing site, yes. For this project, I have not seen it to date any multiple carrier small cell sites.
So it really is carrier specific.
Right, and as a matter of fact, I mean, what I'm working with right now is when we go out to look at sites, sometimes we'll be like, oh, AT&T's here, or Crown's there, so then, it becomes, all right, let's, now we need to pick another pole. So I haven't seen multiple carriers, at least in this area,
So what,
On the same pole.
not on the same pole.
so do you typically start to see their poles clustered, though?
Clustered as in more than one carrier.
Can we expect then AT&T to want to put a pole up?
I can't speak for AT&T's network. You know, again, their coverage and their needs are different than ours. You know, if they couldn't find an existing pole, then certainly they might propose that. But, you know, again, it goes back to because that area that we're looking to cover does not have the ability to, you know, use an existing structure due to the power poles, you know, having the primary power. You know, then it becomes, you know, proposing a new pole.
Just a question. Is it technically infeasible to co-locate on a same pole that you know of?
He said maybe one.
Technically infeasible. Again, I mean, and you know, an RF engineer would have to confirm that, but you know, I mean, with the different frequencies and stuff. I'm gonna again defer to an RF engineer on that, but you know, for me, that would just be something that, you know, I have not seen these close together. So
No, I'm just interested. I'm playing scenarios in my head as if the town, and I'm not suggesting this. This is a theoretical discussion, so anybody listening to this is not a proposal. But if the town sponsored a pole, one pole in that geographic region that multiple carriers could attach to, I'm trying to determine whether that, you know, is technically and economically feasible. So
I don't know how that would work for small cell. I know for like tower sites, like, you know, the big tower sites, that I've seen with the RFP, but I'm not sensing that would be a selling point for small cell.
Okay. Well, that's my question.
Okay.
I've got a related question, and it's probably the same answer, but would it make sense theoretically, not specifically in this case, for small cell to co-locate on conventional cell towers? Because they're essentially lower than the cell tower transmitters, which are up at the top, like from 50 feet or 60 feet and up, and this is at 40 feet. Does it make sense to co-locate on that type of tower?
So the issue with that would be we would not be able to provide the coverage on those regular towers, which is why the small cell works within the right-of-way, because of the need to be able to serve the customers. We need to be, you know, right in that right-of-way. Otherwise, it would degrade the signal.
I'm assuming that it would, well, if we put one behind the public safety building and one behind this building, this is fairly residential around both buildings. And that's so it's a theoretical question. Could a small cell be co-located on the major tower in that kind of a location where it is close to a residential area?
I honestly have not seen small cell get co-located on towers. This particular project deals with, you know, locating within the right-of-way. I mean, there are some cases where, you know, there'll be poles on private property, of course, but most of this, you know, deals with the municipal or the state right-of-way.
I understand, because one of Lyle's comments was, this is a high-traffic area.
Yes.
And that's why you want to put the pole there, and that makes sense. But I would just,
Yep.
you know, since we were doing theoretical discussion, would it be possible to go elsewhere?
And I think, you know, the other comment too with regards to, you know, the feasibility of going, you know, behind the public safety building, and you know, certainly when we look at a site, you know, we look at, you know, all aspects of it, and it certainly, again, to go behind there would degrade the what we're trying to do with that, you know, small cell coverage, which again is why, you know, we've proposed the Route 1A location.
I understand.
So
Okay, thank you.
it really has to be in the right-of-way in order to get the benefit of it, is what you're saying?
Well, but what if it's taller than this? I'm assuming then it can potentially spread farther. Or is that not the case?
I mean, rule of thumb is the taller it is, not in all cases, but the taller it is, would that help the signal? Yes, it can. But certainly we're not looking to make this pole stand out like a sore
thumb.
thumb.
Pole, yeah. No, I'm not talking about it in the right
Yeah,
way. I'm talking about if it was at the public safety building. Because we're literally talking, what? How far is it from there? A few hundred feet? A couple hundred feet? A few hundred feet, probably.
Football field.
Yeah. Right.
So, you ready?
I was just gonna ask another question,
Go ahead.
or I was gonna tell the board. I went on a field trip to Gordon
Can you
Conwell.
speak into the microphone just so the audience can hear
I'm
you?
trying to speak into it.
You're leaning back in your chair.
All right. I went on a field trip to the Gordon Conwell site where there are 5 carriers, and we went up in the steeple and took a look at the thing. And we were very impressed by the fact that all of the equipment was located in one place. And I noticed that I have 2 bars here for AT&T, and I get 3 bars downtown. So it covers a great distance, and you don't have a lot of concentration of small towers all along the roads. So I think that there's a lot to be said if you find one good place, as long as, and since this doesn't carry voice, then I don't understand why that's any more beneficial than going with the large towers.
Well, it actually is more beneficial because we are looking to cover the data capacity needs of our customers. So although the towers will help with the voice and so forth, the small cell helps with the data. And to your comment with regards to the the church steeples, I mean certainly the carriers from the the macro standpoint will do that in terms of co-locating inside steeples and so forth. But that again, that's a different technology that we're dealing with. With the small cell, we're looking to get into the right-of-way location.
I mean, really what this is doing is it's helping to boost the data capacity of the network, even if they are located on a tower or something like that nearby. This kind of boosts that, correct? And enables a larger capacity for the network.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairperson. That's what we're looking to accomplish and improve that experience for the customer.
And that's the whole key to 5G, right? Is that we know there's going to be that's so much more capacity to a network like that, but that also means so many more locations like this and more towers, basically.
And that's why I think as a town, we need to get in front of it. So, first of all, Eric, I've known Eric for 10 years, but I would like to say that I am not, I have nothing to do with this application, even though I work in the telecom industry. I've worked for Sprint in the past, but I don't have any agreements on any of this type of work. I've never worked for mobility, so I just wanted to make that clear. A couple questions that I want to understand further is mobility is basically a vertical real estate corporation. That's correct, right?
Vertical as well as venue. We work with DAS in terms of the stadiums, hospitals, malls, and areas that need that in-building coverage.
Okay. And right now, you have an agreement with Sprint to actually to locate on this tower, because basically you're proposing the tower, and Sprint is proposing to go on the tower. Or are you proposing the technology? I was under the impression that Sprint's giving you the technology to put on the tower.
So mobility is the pole owner, and Sprint, who is our customer, is going to be the carrier that will go. So Sprint has the agreement with us to go on that new pole.
And then you have an agreement with MassDOT already in place?
That's correct.
And an agreement with National Grid in place?
That's right.
Okay. So in essence, if you have those agreements in place, is that agreement strictly to a mile marker on the highway, or is it to up and down the highway?
I guess I'm not following your question.
The way highways are laid out is they use miles in station points along the highway to say this catch basin is at station 100 plus 00. So my question for you, I guess, is this location specifically tied in your agreement with Mass DOT, or are you able to go anywhere within that right of way up and down 1A?
It's not tied to a mile marker. It's, based upon, what is going to give us the best possible coverage. And then that location is reviewed by Mass DOT.
And is it on either side of the road?
Correct. So when you have the Mass DOT right away, correct. It is, either side of the road.
And they understand that you're sinking a new pole in basically a side of the road that there's no poles on at all whatsoever, other than a few guy poles.
Yeah, that's correct. My colleague Lyle Bookbinder has already, reviewed this with them, and he did get a preliminary finding from them, and they definitely said, continue to move forward, work with the board.
Because I don't driving up and down that area this morning. Seems to be there's other places that this would be less intrusive. For one, this is basically in the front of somebody's yard. And as the planning board, I think it's our responsibility to also look out for the neighbors, even though they may not be here to discuss or protest it. But I think when that pole shows up basically 2 feet off of this guy's parking space, we're going to be the first ones that are called. Number two, the other question I have is, I think that mobility owes us more than just one location. Looking at your RF plan, it's not, you're barely covering any of the area. You're probably covering less than 20% of the area that's shown as deficient on here. So I think that's got to be further clarified for us before this application is ruled on.
Certainly, Mr. Ham, and we can, provide, that information and, make sure that, we vet that out and, provide that to the board.
Well, especially down 1A, because that there's a lot of traffic down 1A. So is there going to be a plan to have another pole later on down 1A to cover the area?
From our perspective, at this time, there are no plans for that. I can't speak for the other carriers, but, this is the site that we're proposing at this time.
Varsity is putting facility in the steeple of Wenham, and it's going to cover our downtown as well.
Verizon.
So we're getting it from both sides.
Verizon.
I said, well, Varsity's the one who's putting the facility up in the steeple, but then Verizon may be their carrier. I don't know. But
So I'm just wondering, you're looking for an unencumbered pole, basically, that gives you 40 feet of height, right? That's in a premium location to address the deficiency of service.
It's a wood pole.
Well, I'm just wondering, and I'm thinking out loud, and I don't know technically whether it would work or not, but in Patton Park, we have lighting poles that I think are 30 or 40 feet high, and they only have a light on top of them, and they have power, and they're probably 100 feet off of Route 1A, and they're right in the district. So I'm wondering, since they're already there and they're unencumbered, is that a possibility to use those or one of those?
If I'm understanding you correctly, these would be light poles.
Yes, they're aluminum poles with
stadium lighting
ball
almost,
field
yeah.
lighting.
Okay. Again, that's something that I can look at that with the RF engineers, but it's going to come down to, what they can say,
No, understood. I'm just
but,
thinking.
but I
I'm try-
appreciate that.
I'm trying to think of alternatives that we've already got the standing structure and it's town-owned land, and it's got power to it, and it's an erected structure that's very close to 1A, and it's actually, it's probably 200 yards, maybe 300 yards from your proposed current location in Patton Park. So it might be worth looking at that, because if you could locate on that, it literally looks like it could bolt onto that. It might be a great solution.
Certainly. Again, I mean, I would, review that with the engineer
Right.
and see what their.
I'm not asking you to make a commitment, but I think
Right.
that might be something to look at, because it's already there. We don't have to go through the whole process of, recreating a new pole.
I have a question that's related to that. I think from the way Lyle was talking when he was here, that he's basically, this site was chosen because of the road traffic on Route 1A.
Yes.
And I think part of the, somehow I thought perhaps part of it was because Walnut Street comes in there right about where the site is planned. But where Rick is talking about, I don't know how long this is, but 300-400 feet, 500 feet maybe, or further. It's up closer to the,
Corner of Asbury and,
Right.
pardon?
corner of Asbury and
right.
Bay
Corner of
Road.
Right where the
Asbury and
word
Route
Hamilton
1A.
is.
It would have most of the same amount of traffic. It's, if you can see where I'm talking here, it's right in this area where he's talking that the poles are. So it could, it would essentially move this up here, and laterally, this distance would maybe transpose it a little bit in this direction, but it would cover the same kind of area that the pole you have proposed would cover. I don't know if that would help.
I understand what you're saying.
What it's gotta come down to, sorry,
That's okay.
is it's gotta come down to a town-wide plan, or at least the commercial/dense residential area plan, because we can move them up and down that street as much as we want, and this blob is just gonna go further up that way or further that way, so. I don't think alternatives, I think if we're talking alternatives, we should be talking also about buildings and, can you mount a small cell
Yeah.
structure on a building? Question one.
So to answer that, again, for this project,
Well, I think that's the problem. We're talking. You keep saying this project. I mean, for us, I don't care about the project. I want to know alternatives, right? If people aren't liking the project, I want to know what the alternatives are.
and I'm happy to look at this. I don't want to, say, sorry, we're not going to work with you. But
Oh, right.
I just, wanted to, clarify where we're coming from. But and I certainly, understand where Mr. Ham's coming from. That, are there alternatives? I mean, but again, I, would need to take some time with the engineers to see, does that work? Yes or no, and then if it doesn't, then I would present that to the board, and if it does, then
Yeah, I mean, clearly it does, because you locate these in hospitals and in stadiums, so you do attach to buildings.
and again, I mean, it's
But-
but again, I mean, that's not
Apples
just
to
small cell or only small cell, but that's more of the macro kind of network.
Right. So I think what you're hearing is basically we want to see some alternatives other than that site. We understand that site is your preferred location, but I think it's incumbent upon us to ask you to see if there are other alternatives. Because
Okay.
our biggest fear is the proliferation of sites all over town And so we want to know what the options are.
Okay.
So unfortunately, or fortunately, you're the first guy to the gate. So we were just having this discussion and having to explore and learn about the technology and what can function and how it functions and where it functions and what are the ramifications of this technology as it impacts the town.
I mean, if I may, say, again, and I am happy to gather that information, it'll take me, some time to get it. If, I could ask of a continuance from the board to have that time to gather it, then, certainly, we could come back in with that and have that further discussion.
Yeah, I have no issue with that, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. One of the, related to buildings, the person who owns the building that this tower is supposedly going to be right in front of, which is where the hair salon is, and I think there might be an architect in there and a maybe somebody else. I think there's a chiropractor or somebody in there, I'm not sure. The person that owns the building is also the guy who runs and owns the barber shop or hair salon that's there.
Okay.
I'm not going to speak for him, but it would not shock me if he would be amenable to something on his building if that works. And the key there would be if that works.
Yeah, I mean, again, and I don't, I mean, I'd have to, have that discussion with them. I don't know, what their interest is, but, certainly it's good information.
I mean, is that something you guys have done before, that you locate something like this on a private building? I mean, I'm not talking about like a hospital system or a stadium system, but this is for obviously public use on
So
a state highway.
the private building thing, like from where my company's coming from, would be more like of the DAS, like the distributed antenna solution. Also at private landlords, like if they have poles on their property, we've worked that kind of project too, that, maybe they have poles set back where, no one sees them.
Okay. Any other questions?
I think, Patrick, are we going to actually adopt a small cell bylaw?
We have discussed on a number of occasions the fact that we need to prepare one. And Brian and I were before the Board of Selectmen last night, and we were suggesting that we were going to consider having one at Springtown meeting.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. Is everybody okay with continuing this?
Yes.
So how much time do you think you need?
Could I come back next month, January? I don't know when your meeting is exactly.
Yeah, what is that date?
Something like the
I
5th.
think you're meeting on the 8th.
8th and 22nd.
How about January 8th?
Fine with me.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to continue the public hearing for mobility communication equipment special permit petition to January 8th, 2019.
Second?
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
See you next month.
Bring last pictures.
He'll actually be back at that time, so he'll have his official pictures.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
Great. Master planning update. Patrick said he and I went before the Board of Selectmen last night and basically updated them on where we were with the housing portion of the master plan. We talked about the process, talked about the focus groups, talked about getting, public interest and so forth, and talked about the public meetings that will be happening in February and March. Scott made a suggestion that we, do everything we can to get as much public input as possible. Which I agree with. We want as many people to come to these meetings as possible and be involved. He made a suggestion that all all 9 of us, or whatever there is, 8 or 9 of us, pick another board in town, whether it's Concom or Affordable Housing Trust or what have you, there's quite a few, and go to a meeting for one and talk about this master plan update and what we're doing so that they can then spread the word to their friends and colleagues and others. So just so we can really, get the word out to everybody, and on top of the other, avenues we're gonna pursue in terms of outreach, like Salem News and the Chronicle and the web and town Facebook page. I mean, all these other things. So I have no issue taking a board. We'll just have to come up with a list of the boards that we want to go to and divvy them up. Is everybody willing to do that for one meeting?
Sure.
I mean, some of us are liaisons to other boards, so that's obviously one there. I mean, Ed, you're already on, a couple, so you could speak for us on those as well. So we've got a few covered already. So I think that's a.
Should we have a publicity subcommittee? Because if this doesn't have somebody focused on this, it's going to get lost, and that's going to set us on a path that's going to have ramifications when we get to the end if we haven't done a really good job of setting the table.
No, I agree. I appreciate you volunteering. So to head that up.
Well, I'm thinking it would include a couple of other people. I can be the pretty face, but I need some substance and.
If you're the pretty face, we're in trouble.
Richard, I'm offended that you would say that. So, yeah, and to that end, that's great that people on this board should be involved, going out and talking to other boards. I think we ought to have, if we do that, we ought to have a fact sheet.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have everybody on message, we're going to get multiple versions and permutations of what this is, depending on what they understand, and which could lead to some misunderstandings. So I wonder if we can find anybody else that would like to assist.
We're going with Jen tomorrow.
Who?
Jen Goldson. We are having a tour tomorrow, isn't it?
No, sir.
Happened already.
Yeah, we had done that a few weeks ago, Peter.
Well, I have it down here for December 5th.
I think it was originally November.
Yeah, it was canceled. And
Yeah.
It was a month ago.
Yeah, it was a month ago.
So anyway, back on topic of
That happened.
publicity and outreach. So
I'll help you, Rick, but you have to drive it.
So what do you want to do? You want to put together that fact sheet, and then do you want to?
this is a lesson for you, Laura.
I'm listed a list.
Never speak.
Never speak.
Should have a list of things to do, like a letter to the editor,
Yep.
try to get an article.
That's real easy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah, for
mean,
both Salem News and the
It's
Chronicle.
going to be, the propagation of that information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yes, I'll take a lead on this, and I'll work with Janelle. And I'd like one other person just to be able to contribute to thoughts, editing, review, suggestions, so that we get the best possible product when we're putting out the word.
I'll do it. I'll do it.
Really, you have time?
To review, and absolutely, I'll do things like that.
Okay. Well, I understand you're building an empire, so.
Oh, yeah, that's fair, but,
Okay, very good. The other, since I'm now on the spot and I'm in charge of this publicity and outreach, I have a question. And that is, we have a number of committee members and the selectmen and other people have suggested names that should participate in this focus group, and I understand is watching your performance last night that was 30 to 40 names. And I'm wondering how we're reaching out to those people. I don't want that to fall on just one person, but I'm just curious as to how that's going to happen, because I understand the focus groups are scheduled to happen in a couple of weeks, or am I?
Yeah, beginning in a couple of weeks.
Right, so we need to get on top of that process and connect with people. You know, it's holiday season, so this could be a real challenge. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering how that's being handled. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you need help?
That would be great to have some help.
And how are we reaching out to those people, or do we know?
Telephone. Some of the folks I have email addresses for, but the majority are going to be by telephone.
Okay. And have those focus groups, just so the board understands in the audience, and I think everybody was here when we had that discussion, but I can't remember. Originally, we were thinking they would just be interspersed with general group, 4 or 5 people in a group, and you just pick names out of a hat, and the people that came out of the hat would be put together. And the consultant suggested it actually might be better, and you would get probably more honest answers from people that had like-minded views of the town, and that's why or the issue of housing, and that's why we tried to pick out people who had both been supportive and highly questioned the need for any kind of housing in town, so that we get a fair and balanced viewpoint, and that those types of people would be put together in a group so that they wouldn't feel constrained to be honest about what they felt in terms of development or non-development and affordability and all those issues that surround housing. So I think we need to be able to describe to them what it is that's going to happen. You know, it's great to call them and say, hey, would you be part of a focus group? And maybe you've already done this, but I was just thinking again, here's what's going to, and I don't know what the logistics are, but it's going to be a 1-hour meeting or a 2-hour meeting. It's going to be led by the consultant. They're going to be asking very specific questions and looking for very specific input. And this input is going to be consolidated by the consultant, and then what's the next step? Just so, again, so we're all understanding what's happening.
So
I love that look.
I look forward to your help.
Oh, God. Here's the thing, though, guys. We're all members of this planning board. That means all of us should be participating in this, actively participating in this, because this is not going to be the Rick Mitchell housing plan, because I can tell you it'll be dead on arrival if it's perceived that way. So just be cognizant of that and think about that. I'm happy to, invest in this because I think it's it's what really drives this town, because it's our source of tax revenue, and it's what provides support for our schools and our community. And if we don't address this in a substantive fashion and get this story straight, it's going to have long-term impact. So I think it's important, but I'd like to see other people step up to the plate, whether it's now or in the future.
Yep, agreed.
So.
Any takers?
Oh, I'm very interested, and I thought I was going on a site visit tomorrow.
Well, you gotta stay up
When
to
you
speed here.
canceled the thing the other day, you said put it on the 5th of December, so that's what I did.
Well, that was about 6 weeks ago. Anyway, so all right, well, I'll work on publicity and connect with parties that have volunteered and Patrick, just so we can get this going. Do we have, just can we announce dates for these focus groups? Have we locked that down, or?
Yes, I have some times with Judy and Jennifer that are locked down. I don't remember them off the top of my head. I have sent them out
To,
to board members.
oh, us?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And if, I mean, as you call people, and if they say yes or no, you know, do we need to help generate more names in
If-
order to make sure we have full focus groups?
That's possible. Yeah, that's possible. We may need more.
Yeah,
How many total do we have right now, do you know? Just,
I think we've got 34.
yeah, and I'm just speaking out loud here to Bill, who's plunking away on his phone, is if we, in calling people, and actually, we might assign to you, Peter, and other members of the board, if you know these people or maybe have experience working with them, is you call them. So if we know that, we might reach out to you because, you know, it's going to be a personal appeal.
Do you have a list that you can send around to us? And
I think it's in draft form.
Yeah.
So,
Later this week.
so, and in contacting those people, and I'm just speaking to myself as well to the board and the public, if they can't, we should ask them who else they know that might stand in for them.
Yep.
And part of this is, and do we, and again, I'm sorry to drag this out, but it really is about logistics. Will they have alternatives, like they can't do Friday at 10 a.m., can they do Thursday at 6 p.m.? I mean, how do we, because all of them may want to go, you know.
Yeah, I can tell you that Jennifer and Judy's time is pretty limited.
Right.
And they've, you know, choreographed things down to the minute.
Right.
In a way that there's really not much flexibility.
Yeah, it's an either or.
Yeah.
well, that's why we need to have even more people. That's why we need to have even
Right.
more people
Yeah.
on this list than, the question is, will you do it? B, can you do it at this time?
Right.
And if they want to do it but can't do it at that time, we might have to go to somebody else anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I would encourage us to expand the list.
well, anyone who's going to be on that list should have known the housing production plans and all these background
No.
things to get ready.
Oh,
No.
No, that's not what we want at all.
Why?
It's not what we want at all. We want a very frank, I don't know what questions they're gonna ask, but we want just them to be very frank and not have that information. We want them to, what do you wanna see in the town, again, I don't know what all the questions they're gonna ask, maybe you have a few, but it's
don't.
more of a general
Oh, I thought you
discussion.
wanted people who were knowledgeable about
No.
housing.
No.
No,
We-
he's just, mostly just straight up
Otherwise,
citizens that,
otherwise we'd be talking to ourselves. If you go and talk to people who are knowledgeable about housing, that might be 30 or 40 people in town. We have 7,200 people in town. We want a wide swath of people who have never participated, but probe and find out, what do they value in town? What do they value in housing? What kind of housing might they like to see? Do they have specific needs for housing for themselves and for their family members or their,
that's what we wanna hear is, well,
their neighbors? So,
I know somebody that needs X type of housing, and we don't have that, that's the kind of thing we wanna
Right.
generate.
otherwise, we're gonna be chasing our own tail if we go that, looking for people who
hear you.
have experience.
Dan?
No, and there probably will be a few of those people that
Oh, yeah.
that know that,
Believe me.
Yeah.
I mean, that included our people from the affordable housing
Right.
area. But, we want realtors and merchants and people from, the school system, sort of that recreational, and people that have never participated.
Right.
But would like to participate and give us their opinion. because the broader the input, the better. Okay, enough.
So, can we do, of the little subcommittee, can we do a quick, chat at some point this week? Just to kind
Chat?
of coordinate, or call?
Conference call?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's 4 people, me, you, Patrick, Janelle?
Yep.
Yeah.
As a liaison, I'm willing to help too, so put me on the list for whatever you need, because I want to help put this thing through and get people involved, so.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, great. Moving on. Future bylaw discussion. Patrick and I also updated the Board of Selectmen on, as you mentioned earlier, future potential bylaws for spring town meeting. One being this microcell bylaw. The other one was, to potentially modify the inclusionary housing bylaw and the formula that goes in there. One of the things that our consultant for the housing portion of the master plan, or Patrick asked them, was if they could potentially help us with that, what they've seen in other towns and how to go about that. And Patrick, you've had more discussions with them, and you can probably speak better to it than I can. I've seen the emails, but I know they've had a couple kind of odd maybe suggestions, and we haven't gotten into the formula at all, really, that I've seen. But
Right. I had asked specifically for them to give us some feedback and some potential solutions relative to the 2 issues that we've been dealing with in the inclusionary housing bylaw, just as a way of educating people at home. There are special permitted residential projects in town, like the senior housing projects that we've done a couple of at the Patton Ridge, as well as permitted one in Canterbrook. For every 7 units, we have to have one affordable unit being contributed to the town. That's a requirement as part of the inclusionary housing bylaw, and that's what we've been talking about. That bylaw has 4 different approaches to it that allows the developer, number 1, as currently written, to have affordable units within the project they're constructing, or an affordable unit off-site, or to contribute land equal to the value of the unit to the town, or to provide a payment in lieu of an affordable unit. That last one, which is the payment in lieu of, basically gives the town a value, a cash value of $146,000, which frankly is a fraction of what a real unit would be provided in this community. So the idea of keeping that part of the bylaw just makes no sense. We need to change that. We need a contemporary number that fits what the typical costs of land and construction and providing an affordable unit would be. I don't know if that's formula driven or something else. Not only have I asked our consultant to give us some light on that, I've spoken with the town manager. He used to be a former employee at the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, and he has asked some of the folks there that I've corresponded with. So some of the housing planners at MAPC are looking at it and looking at other communities that may have actually addressed that formula issue. Another element that we found out as part of the Canterbrook project that was problematic was for us to have age-restricted affordable units within senior housing projects. the Department of Housing and Communities and Development consider those age restrictions to be in violation of the Fair Housing Act, which is something obviously that we don't want to do. You know, as people at MAPC and DHCD have told me, you can create all of the units that you want, but as long as they don't adhere to our criteria, we're not going to place them on the subsidized housing inventory, which gets us ultimately to our 10% of affordable units. So that is the other element of the exclusionary housing bylaw that we need to work on. One of the consultants gave me some comments based on our housing bylaw of those units within the development, and I didn't really think that they fit.
Well, no, one completely removed the age restriction.
Which, you know, you
Which-
no longer have a senior housing project
That's right.
at that point,
right.
which, you know, is in complete defiance of the whole reasoning behind doing a senior housing project, which, you know, they've been very popular for development purposes and popular in terms of the housing stock that they're creating in this part of the country and other parts too. Basically because of the housing demographic and people not wanting the big house anymore.
Right.
You know, and she had some other comments too that I thought that really did not fit well. I've sent some of those to have, you know, some members look at, look over my shoulder on my opinions. I think I'll probably have town council look at it too, once I can get some approval from the town manager to allow me some legal time for that.
Didn't we greatly increase the value of the inclusionary units at Canterbury?
We had a
I think we got
value of
like
what?
4 times what the bylaw says
Wasn't
No,
430,000.
per unit,
total.
for
For
the
the
value of 2 units.
2 units.
So,
Well,
you know,
it's
they were,
215 each.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is still not
Right.
even close.
No,
Should have been 250 at least. But only
Yeah, I
one,
mean-
only one person on the board wanted to get into a negotiation stance with the developer, and so we pushed it up from what they were offering. But anyway, I have a question. Surprise. Are you thinking that we're going to internally, based on consulting with our consultants and MAPC, be able to put together this revision on our own?
I do,
Okay.
yeah, I do.
I mean, it's
I have
a pretty
to,
minor revision in the end, right? It's once we decide what to do.
Right, I just
And once we
wanted to,
decide, you know, you can't just throw any number, I'm assuming, at the thing,
yeah,
right?
we
I
gotta
mean,
have a formula.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
that's what I was going to ask, if we have examples of formulas?
Well, it's funny because Judy is the one that actually put together the inclusionary housing bylaw, 12 years ago, 14 years ago. So we want something that continually updates itself.
Yep.
Right. I mean, with the senior housing bylaw and these affordable units not being able to be age restricted, I mean, they're basically forcing your hand to remove any on-site
Right.
affordable units,
Yeah.
period.
Not gonna
Right?
happen,
I mean, that just comes right off the top, I think,
right.
which isn't, it's a bummer, but I think that's why we have to be careful, or why we have to be cognizant of what we're doing in the inclusionary housing bylaws as options, right? Because,
right.
you know, you don't want to make it so onerous that no one's going to do anything, but
Exactly. We have plenty of bylaws on the books that repel development and property ownership. You know, I think it's important for us to understand the mechanics of what it is that, you know, we're trying to get. And I'm honoring the fact that I have to believe when the town of Hamilton approved the senior housing bylaw, there are a lot of stipulations there that they want to have remain. You know, limiting, you know, children under 18.
If you go back to the town and say, hey, you know, it's no longer a senior housing bylaw, it's you know, it's families, forget it.
That's,
Forget it.
yeah, that's not gonna work.
Right. So,
Okay, so are you thinking that we'll have this for town meeting?
I do,
yeah.
yeah. This can't be Herculean.
No.
You know, I know that other communities have had to do it.
So we've got potentially four things, maybe, for town meeting now. It's the inclusionary, it's potentially a minor modification to the senior housing bylaw in itself, the micro wireless, and then your pool placement tweak.
What's the pool placement? Are we
So-
talking?
Yeah, right now.
I couldn't understand that.
Yeah, right now, the zoning bylaw, and this is good that we're talking about it, the zoning bylaw doesn't regulate placement of pools in Hamilton. Most communities have bylaws or zoning ordinances that have the pools either inside or rear yards. We have the ability to have them in the front yard,
I'm going to go do that.
which
And the point is?
I just think it's peculiar. You know, I have to believe on a 20-acre property or more, you know, maybe that's the absolute right thing to do.
Yeah,
But I also think on part of it too, it's self-selecting that if you have a large property, you have the ability to design it well in a way that's reasonable and, you know, in keeping with what's around you without affecting your neighbors if it's on a large property. But if you are in a half an acre property and you put your pool in the front yard, that's gonna look a little strange.
So are there any regulations around safety, like fencing around
Yes.
pools?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are all state
Yeah.
health codes.
Yeah, that's what I would
and
think.
all that good stuff,
Yeah.
which, you know, will not change,
Yeah.
but it's simply locationing the pool on the
Yeah.
individual yards.
So, that sounds like it's pretty easy to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just put in the pool located inside a rear yard, right? I mean,
In a rear yard,
Rear
Certain
or side
setbacks
yard?
yeah.
Right.
setbacks
well,
and
rear or
screening.
side yard behind the house or, you know, up to the front of the house, something like that, right? Yeah.
Could I comment about another bylaw possibility? And that is, I felt after reading the minutes of the last meeting, we had all the testimony about the marijuana at, you know, Green Meadows. And I have a feeling that that's a fight that's gonna continue and it's gonna go on forever. I think the board is being a little bit deaf and not coming up with some sort of a placement and number of units that could be had in the town and so forth. I just feel like we haven't really faced the issue carefully. And at least the points made by their lawyer, that you can put it anywhere in town and it can be of any size and so forth, and I don't know that, we don't want someone to come and test it. We want to know that it's on certain places with certain soils and certain distance from other people and so forth. I think we need to have a special permit with criteria.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons we said we didn't want to do that last time was that how are you going to pick where it goes, right?
I think
And not.
Well, you have criteria that are so broad, I mean, no, narrow.
I know. Where
I mean, Green Meadows was, you know, a perfect place to put it in my mind. Yet we're gonna be sued by the Patton Ridge people because they didn't expect it and they think there's,
They're not gonna sue.
I think they will, and I think that they're talking about the terrific odor. And
There's
then
one,
returning the
there's
water.
one individual, Peter, not the Patton Ridge people. Just be careful on how you categorize what's going on, because you're putting people in, you're categorizing people that's not accurate. That person proposed that bylaw because they don't want it at Patton Ridge. So that's one person. So let's not say the entire people at Patton Ridge.
I still think the town is defenseless. We don't have anything.
Well, I agree. You know, and I
The state bylaws and
I
so
w-
forth, but we don't have.
I would agree with you. We should address it at some point. I don't see it as a critical, pressing need right now, because there's not likely to be a big push for commercial marijuana growing facilities, more than one in Hamilton. But it's a concern. We ought to have some kind of special permitting if it's available, because we can say it must be on at least 10 acres, and, it's got to be 500 feet from schools and, all that
That's
kind.
one thing, yeah.
Right.
But what I'm
It was,
thinking
it was,
is,
it was the identifying areas where it could go that we were gonna get in trouble.
I thought it was going to be an agricultural type project, and it is going to be greenhouses there. But somebody could be importing product and pressing, and in a sense manufacturing, because we don't have anything that says what we're going to do with the processing of marijuana.
Well, they'd have to come to a community host agreement, and the selectmen don't have to do that. So we do have some control. It's not just arbitrary capricious, and they can just roll into town and spring a no recreational, but any kind of medical marijuana facility. So I agree. We should have some bylaw. But we've got a lot on our plate. We've got a housing master plan update that should be consuming a lot of our time for the next 6 months. And that's going to throw off a whole host of new potential bylaws. So I think we ought to put it on the agenda for having that discussion. And if there is a special permit bylaw in another community that we can use as a template, I would welcome you taking the initiative to find one and propose it. I just don't see it as we got to get it done before the next town meeting.
Yeah, I agree with Rick. And plus, a lot of it is going to be self-limiting. First, if you're somebody that wants to come in and do that, it's basically an industrial situation. We don't have an industrial district. That's going to be one of the limiting factors. Secondly, you're going to have to find some property to do it, and you've got to find the landowner who wants to sell the property and have that put on there, and that is going to be a self-limiting
Well,
factor.
and like you said, you need the community host agreement. That's number one.
Yeah.
And
So
you don't have to do it.
it's not,
We have to-
we're not going to get inundated by them.
State law. So, but I think it's sort of like the cell tower. It's like a technology that's coming. Well, it's a business it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar business, and it's going to impact us at some point. So we ought to be at least thinking about it. So if you want to take the initiative to start researching it and coming up with something, I think that would be great.
But there's also a lot more towns out there that cost per acre is fractions of what they are in
Yes.
this town.
This
So
is
it's-
true.
Oh, yeah.
This is true.
It's never, or not never, it's not an issue foreseeable.
Right, and it was only because the Pattons owned that property. You're right, and I'm not picking any, but there are other large landowners that could potentially view it as an opportunity, an economic opportunity. But again, it's the community host community agreement, it's the cost of land, it's the capital cost to come up with developing a project. I have no idea what Robert Patton and his family are investing, but it's got to be, in the millions just to get this up and running and built. And
How many did he say they were licensing? I think he said 3 other projects.
who?
Yeah, in other places.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Who?
can't remember.
There's 2 or 3 patent.
No, under state law, you need a dispensary in another community, and I think it's it's Stockbridge, Southborough. So they are developing a dispensary and working with Southborough, to permit that and then
Could I speak? I've been
construct
trying
and
to
run it.
speak, but I got 2 different points I'd like to make. One is, I forget what meeting it was that I was speaking at a little while ago, CPC, maybe it was here. What's being proposed at the Patton Estate and into Topsfield is right in the middle of our water supply. And I brought it up to them, to the gentleman who's making the presentation, that how that crop is fertilized is important to our water supply. And the process of greenhouse growing of an intense product is also going to be a big user of water. And I think both of those things should be looked at in connection to the water supply of Hamilton and Ipswich, which are downstream from where they are. That's one. I'd like to go back a little bit, seeing I've got the floor.
Well, so what is this pertaining to? We're talking about bylaws right now.
What?
Bylaws right now.
Well, Peter was bringing up
A bylaw for marijuana.
for medical marijuana.
The attorney that addressed us said, we need to tighten up. And he said, we can put it anywhere in town, we can do, because we don't really, I've forgotten the point, it's in the minutes, but he said you're vulnerable because you haven't done so-and-so, and I guess.
No, we get it. So
And he also proposed that we should develop an overlay district, which would be political suicide. So, you can't.
I'm not talking about
I
committing
understand.
suicide. I'm
not
talking
talking-
about protecting our water supply.
No, we know, we know, but,
And
and look, I have no issue letting you speak, but we're talking about bylaws and changes to bylaws right now. If you want to say something a little later and updates, that's fine, or when.
All right, we'll ignore that. Let me go to something else. We keep talking about senior housing, over 55 housing. And I brought up many times that subject in the past years, is I've always been strictly opposed to discrimination by age. I think it's a very important factor. And I've brought up to this committee before, and I would like to call its attention to it again, is a study done in 2016 by Salem, called Salem for All Ages. The woman that heads up the senior housing here in town is very up to date on that. She spoke to the selectmen about it. And the remarkable part of that study, which is right here, is that their polling of their populace of Salem only found 9% of the populace that have any interest whatsoever in senior communities of any kind. I would strongly suggest that people should make some effort to read this study, or what's the woman at the CO's?
Mary Beth Lawton.
Mary Beth, she's very up knowledge of it, and
Well, to your point, Ed, that's exactly what the Housing Master Plan update is designed to do, through both focus groups and online.
Fine. I think you ought to mix that report into your findings.
Well, actually, we're going to do something much better than that, is we're going to do that in Hamilton. It's great that Salem did that, but Salem has different demographics. So what we're going to hopefully accomplish is do essentially the same thing: is what do we have for housing stock? Who do we have in town? What are their age and income groups? What kind of housing would they like to see? and where would they like to see it, among many other factors, so that we get that kind of information that you're citing, so we have a picture of what people, where they live now, how much do they make, where do they want to be in the future, what kind of housing do they want to see. You could be absolutely right. It might apply to Hamilton that only a small portion want over age 55 housing. Until we have that information, we can't really have an informed discussion, and that was the idea of doing that update. Does that make sense?
Not to me, but.
Really? So how would you do it differently?
I couldn't dismiss the city of Salem or just out of hand because they happen to be a few miles away.
Well, I'm not dismissing it.
When somebody has recommended that there's a report here that's only about a year and a half old, and there's more than one of us in the community, Mary Beth being at least one more, that have taken this report very much to heart, I think it would be a mainstay of what you're studying is to at least introduce that thought process into your preconceived
What's the thought process that we're missing?
I'm sorry?
What's the thought process that we're missing? I'm
Well,
kind
I'd
of...
like to know what I'm comparing, so if you could send me a copy of that, that would be.
Yeah, if you can reference a link to that so that we can review it, so we have an understanding of what you're talking about.
Well,
Yeah, just send us the.
it's right here. You can take a piece of paper and write it down. It's got a.
I'd like to read the whole report, not just the specific statistics, so I have an understanding of why the study was done, what it's designed to do.
There's some of the markers I put in reading it that were important to me, and if I have some relevance to the community,
No one's dismissing anything. This is this is a piece of.
Rick wants to know the difference between it. My way of thinking is I look at the city of Chicago today and I see vertical integration missing totally. And that's because people are taking age discrimination. So that when you look at a city today, the parent is missing, the grandparents are missing, you don't want to discuss that because
Now's not the right
you
time.
want to put numbers on how many old people want to live on this block and that block, and I'm telling you, it doesn't count. It doesn't.
Actually, Ed, I'm going to, and I don't want to drag this out, I think you're going down the wrong path on this. My vision is a community of many age groups living in the same community that have options other than a single-family home. And it could be...
And explain to me why the same guy that developed in Patton Ridge, all right, he developed in Byfield.
Explain what?
Development in Byfield.
What about it?
People can't sell their houses that they've bought into this development. Isn't it fairly well? It was brought to light me. I think I've told this story before. The owner of Amesbury Supply bought a house at the Byfield development, over 55 housing, and he's sitting having breakfast with my sons, and my son asked him, "Why have you put your house? I'm taking a $100,000 loss because I want to get out of here." And my son said, "Well, what's wrong with it?" He said, "There's too many old people."
Okay.
All right? And
So-
I don't think that you give enough credit to the fact is that segregation by age is a big problem in this town, in this country.
I wouldn't...
And I think that it's too easy to talk about, we'll put some numbers on housing and everybody will be content.
Ed, I don't think anybody's going down that road at all.
Nobody's going down that road, Ed.
No.
So, again, your point is well taken. There certainly is age discrimination, and you and I and others in our age group face that all the time, especially in employment. What's more important is there's a huge economic discrimination, and it's right here in this town. Nothing is being built that's
What?
economic discrimination, and it's much more powerful, I believe, and it crosses all age groups, not just the elderly. Nothing is being built in this town less than $1 million. That's discrimination because you can't get anything below that. So what happens to the college student that graduates with $50,000 in debt that wants to live, and that's a low number, wants to live in Hamilton? They can't afford to buy a house. They can't find a place to rent. What about the person that wants to downsize into something smaller? There's no opportunity. They leave the community. So that's what we're talking about here, is trying to have economic diversity for housing, and that appeals to a wide range of economic incomes and age groups, so that you have a real diversity of age and income in our community. That's what this is all about to me.
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay. We need to move on to minutes.
Yeah.
So everybody read the November 20th minutes?
I didn't.
Any issues? Okay.
Is pool still for discussion?
It was 10 minutes ago.
It said, well, Patrick talked about pool placement as being a part. Are
Yeah,
we
and
still on that subject? Can we
We
speak
were
to it?
10 or 15 minutes ago.
All right.
I'll make a motion to approve the November 20th minutes.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Unanimous? Any updates from any other boards, members? Patrick?
I'd make an update that a week from Thursday on the 13th, the CPC will be having a meeting at 7 o'clock. The Historic Commission will be having a public hearing at 6 o'clock on the, what was it, what was it? Ford's development, extending the driveway
road.
6
Yep.
feet.
Yep.
And putting a cul-de-sac at the end of the 4 houses. I had come to the conclusion that it was not worthy of a public hearing. And I think, Patrick, you agreed with Dorr that it wasn't, at least he's put in writing that way, but Donna, our town council, felt that it was the other way. It was in our last minutes. Donna feels that
The letter, was a letter.
Yeah, but she said it was your option to have one or not. But it is what it is.
You want it.
I didn't read it that way.
Is that how you read it?
Yeah, I think she said it was at our option to do it.
At
Yeah.
the HDC's option. That's how it read.
Well, I don't remember the word option in there. I don't have it with me, but anyhow, to give the neighbors and everyone a fair, I chose, the board chose to have a public hearing. So it's been duly advertised. The neighbors have been notified. So if you want to wail into it, you can at 6 o'clock on the 13th.
Okay. Thank you.
Relative to that same project, I'll try to have the decision prepared and to the board for your signature at the next meeting.
Great. Thank you. Anything else?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Great. Thank you.